So we should be live now. We'll apologize to folks a little bit in advance. If there's a little bit of a delay, what we're doing is we're using Restream in combination with Zoom. So it's a little bit of a complicated tech little thing that we've learned to do over the years. Well, I was kind of inspired, and I asked Alana if she could jump on with me so we could have this conversation. Is emotions are very heightened right now, to say the least. So the big step now is reopening. And particularly I want to address with church. I want to address the concern as we're reopening, and there's a lot of strong opinions. And the first point I want to make is the one thing we need to focus on first is not making decisions from a place of desolation, not making decisions based on either anger or fear. Those are the two main emotions that a lot of people have right now. So there's the anger, people who feel like this is a big farce or believe that it's overblown, people are overreacting. Sorry, just got a little text message. Some people think people are overreacting. They think it's overly restrictive, and that by wearing a mask or by engaging in these kind of ultra restrictive precautions that we're inducing fear, we're creating panic, and that this is not healthy for us and not healthy for us as a community or as a country. It's unrealistic, so on and so forth. And I'm trying to present views without judgment, without just as I see it and as I perceive it. The other side would say we need to take as many precautions as possible, that this is incredibly serious, that we need to be safe, and that if we're not being safe, they say we are not being pro-life. And I just was on Twitter, and it was just like, of course, to be fair, Twitter is always a little bit of a dumpster fire. So, I mean, I always take a little bit of what's going on with Twitter with a grain of salt. But I've seen it is the first thing I want to start off with is I think people need to employ a little bit of empathy, and that is trying to understand the other side. And we're having to do this as a parish. It's kind of funny. For the past 2 months, I've been kind of doing my own thing at ECU Newman, and now I'm having to interact with a whole bunch of people that, I'll be honest with you, they haven't been paying attention to me. They haven't been listening to what I've been saying, and they really don't understand my perspective, and they really don't understand where I'm coming from, and trying to work out some compromises, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Alana?
Yep, that makes sense. And I agree with you on the Twitter dumpster fire. That's not where I go for Catholic content.
Well, we got to be careful because this is actually live streaming on Twitter too. So,
no. So just let you know, guys, step it up.
I don't like you, Twitter. No, well, it's funny because it's only gonna get like 26 views on Twitter. Twitter's not our main audience. So let me pull up the restream just in case there are some comments. I don't know if I can see the comments. Yeah. So sorry, folks. So we're not gonna be able to respond to comments. I'll go back and look at afterwards. So what I want to kind of do is a little bit get at is I want to do some spiritual exercises in the coming days and just kind of thought experiments, walking through things. And I think the big one I want to address right now is the fear. Now, first of all, I would say this. So I've talked about conscience in my homily. I don't think I want to talk about that again. I want to jump a little bit with Alana into an account of St. Francis of Assisi. Do you have it, Alana, by chance?
Did you? I didn't. I got it right before you sent me the Zoom link. Father Ian just jumped and said, "Hey, do you want to talk about this? We're going live now." Okay. And so I didn't have time to read what you sent me. So
yeah,
no, it'll be a surprise for me too.
Well, let me read it a little bit and then we'll jump in. So this is from an account. So one of the things that St. Francis is known for, is famous for, is kissing a leper, and kissing lepers and advocating that his brothers physically care for and touch the lepers. And I think we have to start off with is a conversation about a little bit of difference in vocation, right? So at his time, leprosy was probably pretty contagious. I don't know for certain their views of leprosy at the time, but I'm pretty sure we would say it's the possibility of catching leprosy while you're touching in physical contact's pretty high, right? Wouldn't you agree with that, Alana?
Yeah, it's fairly contagious. That's why they had to be separated from society.
Absolutely. So he's going against this. He's going against the establishment of his time. He's going against the wisdom of doctors and things like that. Well, it's also, I want to say, his vocation. One of the things that we get at with the celibate vocation is the extreme poverty and the willingness of sacrificial love that's modeled by the priesthood, that's modeled by religious. And I think we have to back up and kind of meditate on the differences between the married vocation, where you have a responsibility to your family, versus the religious vocation, which I think that's a huge thing. Isn't it funny? Wasn't it just like 3 or 4 months ago where people were like, well, what's the value of celibate priests anyways? Like, why do we really need celibate priests? It's like, well, precisely in situations like this, one of the key features of the celibate priesthood is my ability to die for the sake of mission and not have to worry about a family, not worry about the consequences in a certain sense. Does that make sense, Lana?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it really shows, because you really do have, in these situations, have to make that type of sacrifice to put yourself in possible danger, to go and anoint and do what you need to do to serve without having to worry about that type of family dynamic.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There was something going on by your microphone, I think. Was there a window blown, or is that mine?
No, my printer is just deciding to
Print something?
It's just deciding that it wants to act up. I don't know.
Okay. Now my dog is paying attention too.
Tech demons. That's what's happening.
So anyways, Charvel's here and he wants attention. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the account and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Okay. Okay, here it goes. Eventually he arrived at a cloister of monks where he spent several days covered with only a cheap shirt, serving as a scullery boy in the kitchen. He wanted to be fed at least some soup. So it's interesting. The first thing that inspires St. Francis is the bad example of religious. No mercy was shown him, and he was not even able to get some old clothes. Not moved by anger, but forced by necessity, he moved on to the city of Kabul, and he obtained a cheap tunic from an old friend. So it's interesting. The first part is he's rejected by the monastery. He's rejected by like receiving care from other people. So there's a certain necessity, and it's interesting. He says he is not moved by anger, but forced by necessity. So let's see. Shortly afterward, when the fame of the man of God had grown far and wide, and his name was spread among the people, the prior of that monastery, when he recalled the event and understood what had been done to the man of God, came to him, out of reverence for the Savior, begged forgiveness for himself and his monks. That's an interesting way to start this off and to put the context of Francis kissing a leper, which is, I think, in this time, when people haven't shown courage and they've abandoned their post, can we be like St. Francis and be forgiving? So I think there's something for folks that right now that may feel abandoned or feel that their shepherds didn't show courage in the midst of crisis, similar to what Francis experienced, right?
So do you think that people who feel that way, who go to a different parish for the meantime, do you think that that's kind of like what's happening? That they're just being pushed by necessity?
And I think there is something to be said for that, because I've talked about it. I think that's a good way of kind of drawing inspiration from this text, not out of anger, but pushed by necessity. That there is something to be said right now where we have to obey our conscience. And I think there are some people right now that are finding the reaction one way or another from a particular community goes against their conscience. And we need to respect that. Yeah, we need to respect that. Yeah. So I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's see. Then the holy lover of profound humility moved to the lepers and stayed with them. For God's sake, he served all of them with great love. He washed off all the filth from them and even cleansed out the pus of their sores. Just as he said in his testament, when I was in sin, it seemed too bitter for me to see lepers. And the Lord led me among them, and I showed mercy to them. So let's start off with the smells and the. I want people to imagine the foulness of this, right? This is one of the interesting spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. He talks about hell, and St. Alphonsus Liguori in his meditations on death, on last things, talks about imagining the rotting corpse. I want you right now, I think there's a few things that we can meditate on. One, the pus, the sores, the ugliness of disease, but also maybe address some of your fears about the coronavirus. Are you afraid of going on a respirator? Are you afraid of struggling to breathe? Really addressing those fears. What is it that you're afraid of? What is it that repulses you? And kind of work against it. This is the idea of the nodus ex of St. John of the Cross. He says, endeavor to be inclined always not to the easiest, but to the most difficult, not to the most comfortable, but to the most distasteful. Work against your fear right now. Like, so for example, if you're somebody who's really deathly scared of getting coronavirus and dying, I want you to imagine that God is calling you, and I'm not saying you have to do this, I'm not saying it's like an absolute, but maybe do a spiritual exercise where you meditate on God calling you to embrace somebody with coronavirus or work among people with coronavirus. Does that make sense, Lama?
Yeah, it does. And I will be honest, I don't live in an area where coronavirus is very prevalent, so we are pretty blessed for that. A lot of, in the beginning of where my fear came from was fear of panic in other people. Mm-hmm. That's where I was kind of ready to like bunker down because I didn't know what other people were going to do. So I really struggled with that. So it's like, it was a completely different psychological place where I was. Because I was just like, okay, panicked people don't make good decisions. So I kind of want to back away from that. I didn't actually know if I would even come close to getting the coronavirus. It sounded scary. It sounded like something I didn't want to have. But I was actually more afraid of people. That sounds weird, but that's how I dealt with it.
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing wrong with admitting that. And I think, like I saw a Twitter tweet today where somebody was freaking out because somebody was sitting in behind them in church, coughing without a mask on. And whether you view that as considerate or inconsiderate, I think one of the things you have to surrender to, we talk about this a lot in the spiritual life, you're not going to be able to control the outside world. I understand that you might have strong opinions about taking precautions. You might have strong opinions about taking precautions. There are always outliers. There are always people who do stupid things. And you're going to have to work through some of that fear. You're going to have to work through some of that. Whether you get up and move or whatever, I'm not, and that's the interesting thing. The person was like paralyzed by their fear. Whereas, I mean, they could have just as easily gotten up and moved or whatever. Like if they hadn't been paralyzed by fear, they might have acted. Right.
And to be honest, if that was happening to me, I definitely would be like, I would notice and be like, okay, this is somebody's coughing behind me. There's definitely that, like, okay, that's not what we're expecting right now. Normally it's like nobody makes a big fuss about stuff, but like right now it's like being behind somebody and coughing, and I would think if I had a cough that I would need to leave. That's how I feel. But we can't control other people. It's like,
I think it definitely would make, I mean, even though I'm not afraid, you'd definitely be like, are you kidding me, buddy?
Yeah. Well, it's like, and it's like, I was just at the store today and I was like, oh no, I have to sneeze. Oh no. Like I don't have coronavirus, but I have to sneeze. And I didn't want to be treated like a plague, somebody with the plague. So I was just like, I went like this and it went away and I was like, oh, like I don't have to be sneezing in public. Like that feels like such a sin right now, just sneezing in public. Like I have allergies. Okay, people.
I was sitting with my dad here at my parents' house. I'm at my parents' house. And my dad was coughing or sneezing or something. And I just looked at him. I was just like, for a second there, I was like, I hope he's not getting coronavirus.
But that's like, now we've been trained. That's like the first thing we think of. It's like we've been trained throughout these last 2 weeks to like be hyper aware of these things. And it's just really interesting how we as social beings like train ourselves so quickly, to be alert, when it's like, okay, danger. This is a danger situation.
And that's where I think actually talking with you has helped me empathize a little bit more with the Twitter person. Because, my initial reaction was like, this person being a wimp or whatever. But there is something about it where it's like, if we're honest I think that's where employing empathy is going to be incredibly helpful, which is what Twitter is notoriously bad for. because you see the tweet, you see it out of context. The person doesn't have an opportunity to kind of give some context or whatever. Because I mean, even some of the things we've just said, if we took it one way or another and we just took it out of context and just tweeted it, we'd probably trigger like half the population, which is maybe there's something about Twitter that just that's what it does by nature, it just triggers people.
I would agree with that. Biz quick content doesn't really get to the bottom of anything. I really think that when it comes to, I don't know, even if everyone was wearing a mask and they were all 6 feet away, but people just started coughing, I think people would still be freaking out.
Yeah.
Because they know that the masks technically don't actually stop the actual virus.
Yeah.
So we're wearing them to help calm other people down, and maybe we won't get it, but we don't actually know. You know, so it's like, it's still like, okay, this is helping other people, and it makes other people feel safe, and maybe it makes some people feel safe to wear it. But if they actually were around people who were coughing and sneezing, would they feel safe, or would they want to leave? You know, like even if you're 6 feet away, if you're doing all the social precautions.
Which is, and that's maybe something to consider right now, is that if we are coughing or sneezing, it's just stepping away for a second, or stepping out, or
get
your stuff together or something. Wash your hands, cover your mouth. It's really fascinating, the developing a dynamic. So let's continue on with the text and kind of, let me find, I gotta put it up. Where did I put it? There it is. All right. So when I was in sin, it seemed too bitter for me to see lepers. For he used to say that the sight of lepers was so bitter to him. In the days of his vanity, when he saw their houses even 2 miles away, he would cover his nose with his hands. I think one of the keys right now is all these things that we're talking about. I think one of the things I'm learning, when they actually discuss it with us in formation, is the person who overcomes themselves, as in the language of this document of Solano's account of St. Francis, the person who overcomes themselves and maintains that peace is the person who discovers those soft spots where they need to be triggered, and they push those buttons. Like if you're going out in public and you're scared and you get home and you're like, you know, I'm just so happy to be home, I don't want to think about the outside world. I would say go close the door, as our Lord says, you know, go into your heart, go into the depths of prayer, and encounter your fear. Let yourself be triggered over and over again until you're able to be more rational. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it makes me think of like the woman at the well, where she was probably confronted by her reality daily, which is why she was there in the middle of the day. But Jesus pushed on her reality with his charity. He like touched probably the harshest spot, like the most triggering thing.
Hold on 1 second. I got to discipline. Charbel. He's come here, boy. Charbel, come here. He's taunting the older dog, and he's trying to get the older dog to play. But the older dog is like, he's this old, really old dog you can barely see. Poor dog. All right, sorry. Back where you were saying.
Okay. Well, I was just saying that the woman at the well, when Christ is telling her everything she's done, is a point of trigger, right? It is the most, you know, shameful place that she has been, and she felt it in love, and she wasn't triggered to anger by it, right? She was called forth to love and tell everyone about what this man has done, right? Told her who she was. Yeah. And really, when we go into like thinking about being triggered, or thinking about like needing to go in, you know, closing the door and really being with Christ in those moments of where we could be triggered and being triggered over and over again, just not in the way of socialized, you know, like social media triggering, but in the way where Christ can remind us of who we are in him.
Absolutely. Now I just got to plug my computer in. All kinds of stuff's going wrong. That's what happens when you're spontaneous.
I know. It happens. I know. That's why. And I did not prepare for this. So this is all
your thoughts. You're absolutely right. 100%. And I just gotta find where the extension cord goes.
So, technical setup. You should have plugged your computer in before we went live. Just telling you now.
I know.
Next time. He was really like, let's do this now.
Well, it's just I'll just move to action by Twitter. That's the problem with being spontaneous sometimes.
Well, you don't want to forget what you have to say.
All right, let's see if I can get this to reach.
You good?
Almost.
All right. So.
Dang it. I'm going to find this extension cord real quick.
Oh my goodness, guys. Guys. So I can see your Facebook page.
Yeah. What is the comments? Share them.
So there are some.
What are some comments?
Rose says all coughs do not mean you have the coronavirus. We know.
Oh yeah, it's and that's I think also something to consider is that there's also an element of fear that is irrational, right?
Right.
Where did
And Carol Green says, I'm not afraid of being sick. I had advanced cancer 4 years ago and was never afraid of being sick or death. Truly, I wasn't afraid of what I would suffer. I was afraid I would die and leave my children alone. I adopted them at age 3 and 7, and they have already lost one mother in their childhood. And I'll do everything in my power for them to not have to lose two. I'm more at risk so if people won't take precautions for others, I'll have to stay at home for some time. And that is a big problem. Like, how are we taking precautions for the people who are high risk so that they also can rejoin society safely? It's an important point, Carol. Father Ian is still walking around his house. All right. Rose says, since I am high risk group and help sick neighbors, I'm doing more than I normally would, but it is getting to the point where I need to see people. I know, Rose, it's hard. The mental health part of this whole coronavirus is extremely sensitive, and we need to make sure that we're caring for people's mental health. And then we have Karen who says, we have had people cough and sneeze on us during church for forever, long before coronavirus. I have immune compromised kids and they inevitably do get sick. We have never moved because I didn't want to offend anyone. In these times, I guess we probably would move. Well, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Carol says, I miss people too. I went to an outdoor mass and enjoyed it so much. I was literally aching for the Eucharist. Yeah, it's a good place to be, to want the Eucharist so bad, but it's not good that we had to go through this for that ache.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you ready? I just was reading so I can.
Well, I was thinking about it as I was finding the extension cord and figuring that all out. And to be fair, I did have an extension cord, but my mom moved it on me. So, no, that's some really good, interesting feedback, and definitely things to talk about as we move forward. I think, that's definitely. I think that makes sense, and I think that's one of the values I think of us continually jumping online and having these conversations. That's one of the things I'm realizing, because I think a lot of us, for the most part, we do tend to stay in our comfort zones. And what I would say, just for some of those folks who are talking, is what you really want to do is, even though I think your fears are legitimate, you still want to work through them, right? So you can have some amount of peace. Mm-hmm. So like Carol, I know Carol well. She's a Christian, and I would say to Carol, is like, okay, absolutely, you need to be precautious and you need to take precaution. But one of the things I always go back to is the early childhood experience was I was in Panama, and we've discussed this before, and we were there during the invasion. And it's incredibly important when you're the head of your household and you're or you're a leader within your family, is to project peace and calm, even if things are a little bit chaotic. We were there during the invasion. there was the possibility of death. People were dying. The army was invading a country where they're doing the invasion of Panama. And one of the things I'll never forget is my mom really framed it as being courageous. And I think that's an incredibly important quality in the midst of crisis, is you can't base things on fear. That being said, it does sound like you have some legitimate concerns. It's not, I think this is where discernment is not always about action. Maybe that's like a step that people jump to, like, how am I going to act? First, conquer how you think and try to overcome the thought traps and the strong emotions.
Your video is...
Oh, yeah. It's about a half hour.
Yep. So
thanks.
You're welcome. I would also say in discernment, like, I agree that people jump to do, and that a lot of times that we forget who we're called to be in the situation, and sometimes we jump to doing things that aren't in line of who we're called to be. Yeah. So some of us are not called to be the medical experts. Absolutely. Some of us are called to serve others in ways that we wouldn't normally call to. But if we don't discern who we're called to be in that moment, then we won't know what we're supposed to do.
Makes perfect sense. So. Cool. Well, let me continue on with it a little bit. So he said, when he started thinking of holy and useful matters with the grace and strength of the Most High, while still in the clothes of the world, he met a leper one day, made stronger than himself. I love that. Made stronger than himself, he came up and kissed him. I want us to think about this, particularly with the fear, like Carol and other people. Absolutely take precautions, but you need to be prepared to set aside the precautions for a higher calling. Like, let's say somebody is dying on the side of the street with coronavirus, and that's why I get the idea. Would you kiss somebody with coronavirus? You need to be prepared to lay down your life for the sake of other people. And I know that's incredibly hard, but you need to be mentally prepared for that. There are so many stories, unfortunately, that in this coronavirus, people are hurting other people. They're leaving them, they're abandoning them, and they're not taking care of people in need because of fear. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and I might highlight some of those this Sunday. But I love that. He was made stronger than himself.
And I would like to point out, or maybe we can meditate on the point that he didn't go out and plan to, it wasn't like he built up his courage and went out, right? Yeah. It happened in the moment. Yeah. He was given grace in that moment to make that decision. So we're not saying, like, would you kiss someone with coronavirus? Decide now.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that's a different perspective that maybe we need to talk about, that sometimes there are things that you haven't pre-planned or actually gone out to be courageous, right? Sometimes when you do that, it's a little bit destructive.
Yes.
You think you're being courageous, but you're not. You're being destructive. So I really think it does take discernment. And it's in those moments, in the momentary discernments, that where we practice those momentary discernments, where we can really learn how to know what God has planned for us.
Absolutely. And I refer to a lot as baseball versus golf decisions. We've talked about this before, right? Mm-hmm. Golf decisions are more like your career, your vocation, what you're called to do. Mm-hmm. Baseball decisions, if you think the way baseball works, you have a split second to decide in baseball whether you're going to swing or not. And a lot of times those split second decisions, what they have to do is they have to be built on habits. And often those baseball decisions are the fruit of solitude and meditation and prayer. That is, in the solitude of the heart, you conquer your fear so that even though you're taking precautions, you are prepared. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I'm afraid, and it's justified. But that's a lie of the enemy. Even if it's a justified fear, you can't live according to fear. You can't live according to disordered affections, disordered emotions. You have to conquer them. That is an important part of discernment. Even if it's a justified fear, if you're basing decisions off of fear and anxiety, that is not the place you need to be, right?
Right. And it is okay. So he's not saying don't follow certain precautions.
Yeah.
that's not what Father Ian's saying, because that's what it can be twisted as. So I just want to clarify. That's not what you're saying, because sometimes we think, well, sometimes we're just following, like, okay, this is what we're supposed to do because other people are, even if you're not afraid, other people are afraid. So this is what we need to do because of fear. Well, discern those things, right? Make sure that you know that why you're doing these things, and to live in the hope of Christ. Like, that's the end for me. It's like, okay, to live in the hope of Christ, not living based on fear, but living based on the hope of Christ. And sometimes taking precautions because this is what's happening.
Amen. Amen.
I don't know.
Yes,
Maybe I made that worse.
I think that's a good place to end. So I'm going to jump on immediately after, check out comments and stuff and kind of respond to people. Thanks, Alana, for helping me vent and process.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much, Alana. I'll
Okay.
talk to you. Hold up a second. It's as I